The crowd sounded like an avalanche of static and animal howls. The air shimmered with heat rising from the arena floor, and somewhere above, a dozen languages barked in overlapping broadcasts. Every alien voice agreed on one thing: the human wouldn't last 5 minutes. Cassidy Monroe, cast to anyone who wanted to avoid being punched, sat in a metal cage just off the sand pit, one ankle crossed over the other, calm as if she were waiting for her latte. The shackles on her wrists were sized for something twice her build, and the insectoid guard across from her kept glancing at her, like she might suddenly gnaw her way through them. She noticed. She smiled. He looked away. The Velcor Empire's public hour of honor wasn't really about honor. It was about humiliation. Take an outsider, preferably one from a so-called death world, throw them into 60 minutes of tooth, claw, and plasma fire, and let the galaxy watch the Empire prove itself dominant. Usually the outsider didn't make it to the first commercial break. Cass had been briefed, sort of, by her captors. Her ship, the Silver Banshee, had been pulled out of hyperspace by a Velcor patrol after what she insisted was a navigational misunderstanding, and they insisted was armed intrusion. The court proceedings had been a joke. She'd been marched into a hall the size of a football field, surrounded by alien dignitaries in armor that looked like jewel-encrusted bug carapaces, and read a long list of charges in a language she didn't speak. She'd nodded politely, asked for a lawyer, and been sentenced to the arena in under 8 minutes. Now, as the guard's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter, she leaned forward. "Tell me," she said, "you guys ever seen Rocky IV?" The guard blinked all 4 eyes. "Is this a weapon?" She laughed once, sharp and short. "Is if you know how to use it." A voice thundered from the arena loudspeakers, distorted by alien consonants, introducing combatant number 47, Cassidy Monkey. The crowd roared. "It's Monroe," she muttered under her breath, but she stood when the cage door rattled open. She'd given up on correcting them after the 5th time. Monkey was easier for their mouthparts anyway. She stepped into the sunlight, the arena unfolding before her like a fever dream. The stands were packed with species she didn't have names for: towering mollusk-like beings waving frilled tentacles, sleek reptilians with reflective eyes, feathered bipeds tossing what looked like popcorn but wriggled. A hot wind carried the scent of ozone, scorched stone, and something that smelled suspiciously like overcooked crab. Above it all, a trio of commentators floated in anti-grav pods, their voices booming in turns. "Primitive mammal," one intoned. "Minimal exoskeletal defense," said another. "Observe the poor muscular distribution." Cass adjusted her stance, letting her shadow fall long across the sand. The chatter dimmed just enough for her to grin and say, loud enough to carry, "I came here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of gum." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Somewhere in the commentator's booth, someone was already asking what gum was. Velcor officials stood in a gilded platform above the main gates, resplendent in armor that made them look like jewel-encrusted mantises. Their leader, Mandible Sovereign Korath, spread his spined arms. "Death Worlder, you will survive for 1 full cycle of this station's chronometer, 60 of your crude minutes, or perish in the attempt. This is your hour of honor." She squinted up at him. "And if I survive the hour?" "Then," he said with a rasping click, "you will be permitted to depart. Minus any warships, weapons, or further dignity." Cass flexed her wrists against the shackles, calculating. She could already see weapons racks along the arena walls, the shifting shadows of something, several somethings, behind the heavy portcullises. The sand underfoot was coarse and pale, perfect for blinding an opponent with a good kick. The stands were steep, meaning if she could climb quickly enough, she might get a vantage point. "Sounds fair," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I should warn you, I'm not much for pacing myself." The gate behind her clanged shut. The crowd's noise swelled, a living thing pressing in from all sides. She could feel it in her chest cavity. The announcer counted down in deep, resonant syllables. Cass bounced on her heels, loosening her shoulders. Her mind was already mapping out the first moves like a chessboard. Hit fast, use terrain, turn the opponent's strengths against them. It was what she'd done flying fighters, what she'd done in a dozen bar fights from Tau Ceti to Vega Station. The countdown hit 0, and with a sound like a collapsing star, the first gate across the arena rolled open. Something tall and green-black stepped through, a towering mantis-shaped warrior with scythe-like forearms and armored plates that caught the sunlight in sharp flashes. The crowd erupted in shrill whistles and stamping feet. Cass smiled, not a broad, friendly smile, but the kind that showed just enough teeth to make predators think twice. She reached down, scooped up a handful of the gritty sand, and let it spill slowly from one hand to the other. The mantis took one step forward, its shadow swallowing hers, and raised its bladed arms. The commentators began to narrate the inevitable dismemberment in increasingly poetic Velcor. The insectoid warrior made a high, trilling battle cry. Cass tilted her head, watching it close the distance. "You've got about 17 minutes to impress me," she murmured. "Let's see if you can." The mantis lunged, scythes flashing. Cass shifted her weight, sand exploding under her boots as she moved, not away, but toward it. Her chains rattled once, sharply. The crowd's roar faltered, just for a heartbeat, as human unpredictability took its first step into the Velcor's perfect little blood sport. She was already moving faster than they expected, and she was just getting started. This section introduces Cass as a confident, witty, and resourceful human, clearly setting up the arena fight, while giving us both alien world building and the central conflict, the Hour of Honor challenge. The ending leaves the reader right on the edge of the first club. The mantis warrior struck first, a blur of chitin and serrated steel, but Cass was already inside its reach. The scythe arm skimmed past her shoulder, close enough to slice a strand of hair, and she drove a boot into its midsection. The impact rang like a gong. It staggered, surprised, probably expecting her to run or crumble. She didn't. She pivoted, scooping the sand she'd palmed earlier and flinging it upward into its cluster of faceted eyes. The creature shrieked in a pitch that rattled her molars, swiping wildly as its vision scattered into a kaleidoscope haze. She didn't wait for the second swing. She bolted toward the referee's stand, a raised platform with an alien in ceremonial armor clutching a long staff. The guard was too shocked to react when she vaulted up, grabbed the staff, and yanked. The shaft telescoped apart with a hiss, revealing it was actually a collapsible arena chair. "Convenient," she muttered, folding it halfway and swinging it like a Louisville slugger. The mantis charged blindly, still shaking sand from its eyes, and Cass stepped in, chair leading. The impact cracked across its jawline with a metallic twang, sending it reeling sideways until its legs buckled. The crowd erupted, not in the derisive laughter they'd expected from a quick execution, but in an ugly roar of surprise. A ripple passed through the stands, a new sound, the chant of her name, mangled into something like Ka City. In the commentator's booth, voices clashed in frantic tones. Unsanctioned weaponry, primitive but effective. Violation of Honor Code subsection 16. Her tactics, unpredictable. Cass glanced up, grinning, before hurling the bent chair aside. She didn't hear the ruling over the crowd, but she didn't need to. If they wanted her to fight clean, they should have picked a cleaner game. From the far side of the arena, another gate clanged open. This one disgorged a reptilian brute, broad as a tank and armed with a spike maul that dripped with some kind of phosphorescent venom. Its heavy tail dragged in the sand, carving a groove. It hissed, tasting the air, and locked onto her heat signature. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. The first had been speed. This one would be brute force. She let it close the distance, its footfalls pounding like bass hits, and then broke left at the last second. The reptile swung hard, missing her by a whisper, the maul chewing into the sand where she'd been. The impact sprayed grit into the air. She scooped another handful mid-step and flung it at the nearest pair of nostrils. It roared, reeling back, and she was already circling, calculating angles. The venom steaming off its weapon told her it was corrosive, probably lethal if it touched her, but corrosive fluids were often unstable under heat. Her eyes flicked to a patch of fractured stone where a previous fight must have scorched the floor. She baited it toward that spot, retreating just fast enough to keep its attention, feigning fatigue. The moment its clawed feet hit the cracked slab, she dove low, rolled behind it, and slammed a boot into the back of its knee joint. The brute staggered forward into the unstable ground, one foot punching through into a pocket of molten rock just below the surface. The howl that followed was half pain, half fury. It thrashed, trying to wrench free, tail whipping wildly. She ducked under one swing and saw her opening. The maul's haft was just above her head. She grabbed it, yanked hard, and twisted. The brute's grip slipped in the chaos, and she used the weapon's own weight to swing it in a half-arc. The glowing venom hissed against the fractured stone, exploding into a burst of green flame that enveloped the brute's chest. It collapsed in a heap, tail twitching. Cass stepped back, chest heaving once, eyes locked on the next gate. The timer above the arena ticked past 7 minutes. 2 opponents down. She brushed a streak of ash from her sleeve, noting the burn at her forearm, where a tail spike had grazed her. The crowd's chant grew louder. The Velcor leader on the platform leaned toward one of his advisors, mandibles grinding. Their voices carried just enough for Cass to catch fragments. This pace, unacceptable, cannot allow. Another gate opened, and this time 3 opponents emerged together. A feathered predator with talons like daggers, a squat amphibian wielding a plasma glaive, and a quadrupedal beast with a face like a battering ram. The amphibian grunted something in its own tongue, clearly coordinated. Cass's eyes narrowed. Multiple attackers meant they'd finally decided to test endurance. She knew better than to meet them head-on. She darted toward the glaive wielder first. Long weapons could be turned against their owner if you closed in fast enough. It jabbed, she sidestepped, grabbed the haft near the blade, and yanked the amphibian into the path of the charging quadruped. The collision was bone-shaking. The glaive fell into the sand. She scooped it up in one fluid motion, spinning it in her hands, the plasma edge humming. The feathered predator lunged at her flank, and she swung low, the blade singing through its leg feathers. It screeched, hopping back. Cass pivoted, using the glaive's reach to jab the quadruped in the side, forcing it to retreat toward one of the arena's stone pillars. A plan clicked into place. She sidestepped another rush from the predator, letting it overcommit, then spun, and threw the glaive javelin style, at the pillar. The weapon buried deep, cutting through the support. The top half of the stone cracked loose and tumbled forward, landing directly on the quadruped's back, with a dusty crash. The predator froze for a split second at the sight, and that was all she needed. Cass lunged, planted a fist in its beak, and shoved it toward the amphibian now scrambling to its feet. They toppled together in a flailing heap. She didn't finish them. She didn't need to. The crowd was already on its feet, some waving banners that moments ago had advertised Velcor beer. The timer read 12 minutes. She'd spent longer than that in traffic jams. Up on the royal platform, Torith's claws dug grooves into the railing. His advisor leaned in, voice low but urgent. Cass could see the panic settling in. If she ended the fight too quickly, they'd lose the spectacle, the message, the bragging rights. The gate across from her shuddered open with a grinding groan, and the noise of the crowd changed pitch. A shadow fell over the sand, growing larger until it resolved into a hulking silhouette. Metal gleamed along its frame, punctuated by the dull red glow of cybernetic eyes. The thing was massive, easily the size of a city bus, with armor plates fused into its hide, and a pair of plasma cannons mounted to its shoulders. Cass straightened, heart rate kicking up, not with fear, but anticipation. She could hear her own voice in her head, finally a challenge. The beast's footfalls shook the sand, each one punctuated by the hiss of hydraulics. Its cannons began to spool up with a whine, like an approaching hurricane. She flexed her hands once, adjusting her stance. The crowd's chant faltered into a low murmur, as if everyone knew the rules, had just changed. The cannons snapped into alignment, targeting reticles sweeping toward her chest. She didn't move, not yet. Timing was everything. The beast roared, a sound that hit like a physical blow, and the plasma charges began to glow. Cass rolled her shoulders once, eyes locked on the first flicker of movement. The air around her shimmered with heat. And then, in the space between heartbeats, she moved. The first blast seared past her shoulder, close enough to singe the edge of her jacket. She dove into a roll, feeling the heat on her back, and came up in a sprint toward the beast's left flank. The sand churned beneath its massive feet as it tracked her, the cannons swiveling with mechanical precision. A second shot erupted, melting a shallow crater into the arena floor where she'd been moments before. Shards of molten glass sprayed outward. One nicked her cheek, leaving a thin, hot sting. She didn't bother wiping the blood away. Pain was information, her body's way of confirming she was still in the fight. She darted behind a half-buried pillar, crouching low, as another plasma bolt smashed it to rubble. The debris gave her an idea. As the dust billowed, she grabbed a jagged piece of stone and hurled it at one of the beast's glowing eyes. The rock clanged against the armor, not enough to damage, but enough to make it turn its head for half a second. That was all she needed. She sprinted for the closest of its forelegs, staying tight to the joint where the cannons couldn't angle. Up close, the scale difference was absurd. Each foot was the size of her torso, its armor plates thick as starship hulls. But the hydraulics powering its leg joints were exposed in places, steel and polymer wrapped in flex tubing. She ducked low, jamming her boot into a narrow brace to lever herself upward. Her fingers found purchase on a seam, and she climbed fast, ignoring the spray of hot air venting from the machinery. The beast bucked, trying to shake her loose. Her grip slipped once, nails tearing, but she clamped harder, hauling herself onto a plate between the shoulders. The cannons were close enough now that she could smell the ozone rising from their capacitors. She scrambled along the spine until she reached a gap where one armor plate had been bolted over another. The bolts themselves glowed faintly, heat stress. She pried at the seam with her fingertips, testing the give. No good, the metal was too tight. She needed leverage. Shifting her weight, she yanked free the climbing hook she'd improvised earlier by bending a guard's spearhead in the prep chamber. She wedged it into the gap and leaned her full weight back. The plate groaned. The beast reared, hydraulics screeching, nearly throwing her off. The hook slipped, slicing her palm, but the plate shifted enough for her to see the pulsing inner core, a glowing nexus of cables, coolant lines, and heat sinks. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She had one shot. She reached into her belt pouch, fingers closing around a plasma grenade she'd stripped from a fallen amphibian in the earlier fight. The activation stud hummed under her thumb. She shoved it deep into the cavity, twisting it between cables until it locked in place. The beast must have sensed something. Its roar deepened, a sound that vibrated through her bones. She kicked free from the armor and threw herself sideways, catching the edge of a jagged plate on the way down. The impact jolted her shoulder, but she rolled with it, hitting the sand in a crouch. The grenade's whine rose in pitch, climbing toward detonation. She sprinted clear just as the back of the beast erupted in a spray of molten metal and shredded cabling. The blast hurled her forward, the shockwave lifting her off her feet. She landed hard, rolling twice before coming to rest on one knee. The noise was deafening, the air thick with acrid smoke. When the haze began to clear, the beast was slumped sideways, its cannons dangling limp. One red eye flickered twice, then went dark. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, as if unsure they'd truly seen it. Then the roar came, an avalanche of noise that rattled the arena walls. The timer above the gates froze at 17:03. The Velcor announcer's voice faltered, the rehearsed victory speech lost in the shock. Cass pushed herself to her feet, brushing soot from her jacket. She looked up at the royal platform, locking eyes with Tkorath. His mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. She gave him a two-fingered salute, her mouth curling into a grin that was equal parts triumph and mockery. The chant started again, louder this time, unifying into a single thunderous rhythm. Cassidy. Cassidy. It wasn't her name, not exactly, but she figured it was close enough to put on a t-shirt. She turned slowly in place, letting the crowd drink in the image, the human deathworlder standing alone in the center of a battlefield littered with defeated champions. Her knuckles were bleeding, one sleeve was torn, and soot smeared her cheek, but she stood straight, breathing slow, unhurried. It was important they saw that she wasn't gasping for air or doubled over in exhaustion. The whole point was to make it look like she could have kept going. Above, the Velcor officials scrambled to regain composure. Advisors whispered frantically to Tkorath, their eyes darting toward the cameras broadcasting to half the galaxy. Ending the fight at 17 minutes wasn't just an upset, it was humiliation. The hour of honor had been a cornerstone of their dominance for centuries. Now it was a meme waiting to happen. Cass tilted her head, scanning the arena walls for the exit gate. She could see movement, guards repositioning, unsure whether to treat her as a prisoner or a guest. She decided to make that choice for them. She walked toward the gate at a measured pace, every step deliberate. A Velcor officer moved to intercept, staff raised in what was probably meant as a gesture of authority. She stepped into his personal space, eyes level with his, and said, "Either you open that gate, or I start round 2 right here." His mandibles clicked twice in what might have been fear. The gate lifted. The noise of the crowd followed her down the tunnel, echoing in the metal walls. Her hands were still steady, but the adrenaline was already beginning to ebb, and the sharp ache of her injuries crept in at the edges. She ignored it. Pain could wait. Halfway down the corridor, she heard the hiss of a comm unit clicking on. A voice she didn't recognize, sharp-clipped, trying too hard to sound in control, said, "Cassidy Monroe. You will remain on the station until further notice. The Velcor Council will debrief you." She smiled to herself. "Sure," she said, stepping through into the preparation chamber where her gear had been dumped in a careless pile. "But I charge for my time. And I'm on the clock." The comm clicked off without a reply. She bent to pick up her jacket, patting the pockets to make sure nothing had been lifted. A scrap of alien silk stuck to her sleeve, probably from one of the earlier opponents. She left it there. Souvenirs mattered. Somewhere far above, the arena was still roaring her name, or something like it. She suspected they'd be talking about this for weeks, maybe months. But Cass knew better. News traveled fast in the galaxy, and in a few hours, every major power would know exactly what had happened here, and they'd start making decisions based on the idea that humans could do the impossible. That thought made her grin wider. She'd come here as a prisoner, but she was leaving as a problem. And there were few things more dangerous in the galaxy than a human who'd just been underestimated. Cass sat on the edge of a metal bench in what passed for the Velcor Victor's Lounge, though it looked more like a storage base someone had forgotten to clean. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of coolant, and a single overhead light flickered like it was deciding whether to give up entirely. Her knuckles were raw, her jacket smelled faintly of burned wiring, and her pulse had finally slowed enough for her to feel the bruises blooming under her skin. The door hissed open without warning. Torith entered with 2 advisors in tow, his jeweled carapace catching the dim light. Up close, the Sovereign seemed smaller than he had on the platform, as though stripped of the crowd's roar, he was just another insect in ornate armor. He stopped 3 paces from her and said, "You have disrupted 1,000 years of tradition." Cass looked up, one eyebrow raised. That's what happens when your tradition's built on picking fights you can't win. His mandibles tightened. "We underestimated you." She smirked. "You and every ex-boyfriend I've ever had." The advisors shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to anyone speaking to their leader like this. Torith's compound eyes reflected her image back at her, smaller but multiplied, like a kaleidoscope. "We could detain you indefinitely," he said. "You could try," she countered, leaning back on her elbows. "But here's the thing. You put me in front of the galaxy today. Every broadcast, every replay, every slow-motion shot of me turning your champions into scrap metal, it's out there now. If I disappear, people will ask questions. Dangerous ones. And the more they talk, the less fear they'll have of you." He clicked his mandibles again, but it sounded less certain this time. The advisors exchanged glances, their antennae twitching. Cass knew she had them. She'd fought their soldiers, but this was a different kind of battle, words instead of blows, perception instead of weapons. "I'll leave your station," she said, "but I'm not leaving empty-handed." Torith's eyes narrowed. "What do you demand?" "Repairs for my ship. Fuel. A supply of those spicy leg snacks your vendors were selling in the stands." And, she grinned, a limited edition Velcor action figure of me, fully posable, with removable plasma grenade. The Sovereign's head tilted. "An action figure?" "Marketing opportunity," she said. "You can pretend it's to commemorate your brave hosting of the Hour of Honor. I know a collector's market when I see one." The advisors whispered hurriedly, antennae twitching like static. Torith finally said, "You will have your figure, and your other demands, but you will not return here." "No offense," Cass said, standing, "but that's the easiest deal I've made in years." They left as abruptly as they'd come. Moments later, a pair of guards arrived, not to restrain her, but to escort her through the station's service corridors toward the docking bay. Word had clearly spread. Workers paused to stare as she passed, some with fear, others with the kind of quiet respect you couldn't buy. When they reached the bay, the silver Banshee was there, her hull patched, her engines humming with readiness. Cass stepped inside, running a hand along the bulkhead like greeting an old friend. The cockpit smelled faintly of machine oil and home. She settled into the pilot's seat, toggling the startup sequence. Before she could lift off, the comm crackled to life. The voice was unfamiliar, smooth, formal, and speaking perfect standard. "Lieutenant Cassidy Monroe. I represent the Zorvok Consortium. We have witnessed your performance. Our Grand Coliseum awaits a true challenge. We invite you to compete. Substantial compensation will be provided." Cass stared at the console for a moment, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Let me guess," she said. "No time limit." "A match until one stands victorious," the voice confirmed. She laughed once low. "Send me the coordinates. But just so you know, I'm charging by the minute this time." The line went dead. She eased the Banshee out of the dock, the station shrinking behind her. Out in the black, stars spilled across the viewport like powdered glass, cold and infinite. Somewhere in that spread of light was her next fight, and the one after that. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was reckless, but in this moment she felt alive in a way that no calm planet, no quiet retirement could ever match. The ship's comm pinged again, this time a flood of incoming messages. News clips, memes, merch adverts. One replayed her fight in slow motion with dramatic synth music straight out of an 80s training montage. Another was already selling 17 minutes shirts in half a dozen languages. There was even a crude animation of her smacking the Mantis warrior with the folding chair, looped endlessly. She shook her head, laughing under her breath. Humanity's reputation had just shifted overnight, not because of a fleet, not because of diplomacy, but because one woman refused to lose on someone else's terms. And she knew it would make the galaxy very, very nervous. She leaned back, letting the Banshee slide into hyperspace. The stars stretched into lines, then into the swirling tunnel of faster-than-light travel. Her bruises ached, her muscles were sore, and her knuckles were still bleeding, but she wouldn't have traded it for anything. Out here, survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about stubbornness, creativity, and the willingness to make a joke while staring down something that could kill you. She had all three in spades. And as far as Cass was concerned, the galaxy had just been put on notice. In the hum of the engines and the endless rush of hyperspace, she allowed herself a final thought before the next challenge arrived. If they wanted to test a Death Worlder, they'd better start the clock, because she'd already learned how to finish early.